Hello and welcome to Connect and Collaborate. I'm Alex Hopkins, your on-air producer, and I am so excited to get today's show started. I have in studio with me Jessica Taylor. She is a captain for United Express, as well as a frequent media contributor specifically to CNN's Dr. Drew show. So Jessica, how are you?
Great, thank you. Thanks for having me on this. I'm super excited.
Good, me too. And I thank you for joining us. So I want to talk about a few things with you. One of those being LGBTQ rights in the workplace. We have a lot going on in the Supreme Court right now. But I also want to talk to you about aviation news. We know some 737s were having some issues, things like that. So I appreciate you joining me. I'm focusing on people's businesses all week. And so some people have created their own business while you do fly for a commercial airline. You also have created your own brand of sorts. And so I would like to dip in on that a little bit. So let's talk about your background.
Cool. Yeah, actually, aviation was a secondary for me. I did civil engineering before this. I got into aviation because of the civil engineering. The boss that I was working for at the time owned an airplane. We would fly to all these job sites, and that's kind of what sparked my interest in aviation. Prior to that, I spent, 10 years in Southern California, kind of just muddling through life, not knowing what I was going to do, doing surveying, engineering, and that's what led me, honestly, engineering is what led me into aviation, kind of unexpectedly. I didn't even take my first commercial flight till I was 21 years old. So, and then here I am 36 years old as an airline captain. So yeah, it's kind of what led me here, as a captain now.
Awesome. Well, what did you do civil engineering wise?
So I worked on huge logistic projects. So things like master plan communities, like all over Southern California. In fact, every single project I worked on in Southern California is still being built. So they were things that were built or communities or commercial projects that were built for 100-year build out. So like the Audie Murphy Ranch in Southern California was something they're still finishing to this day. I mean, there's still open land out there that has not been sold. And we would do all what we'd call purveyors for that. So all of your water lines, electric lines, bring all those in, and then we'd grade the whole site and so on and so forth. So honestly, I got into that kind of out of a whim. I liked fly fishing when I was younger, and I liked being outdoors. So that's what led me into engineering. But the projects that I worked on were mostly commercial. So like, what was the name? Prologis was our main customer out there. So, yeah.
That's exciting. Yeah. So, as you mentioned, you would fly to all these different sites. I assume it was on probably like a Cessna or...
Actually, you'd be surprised. So, it started off in like a Cessna 310, which is like a 6-seater piston aircraft, two-piston aircraft. Two pistons, so it'd be two-engine piston airplane. And then it started, it kind of grew into working with a group out of Utah that now owns Vivint Alarm Group, which was Apex Alarm Group. And it was Challengers and Boeing business jets around the world. So we worked on projects overseas. Most of them were domestic, but, a handful were out in Dubai and, doing huge wind projects over there. So.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
So did you get your license on one of those? Walk me through the dip into aviation from there, because we have this in common. We were both bit by the travel aviation bug, and it's so hard to get rid of that disease. So you have been plagued with the aviation disease.
And it's horrible because I feel like, when you pray at night, you're like, dear Lord, let me love aviation. And God's like, okay, cool. He puts a little drop in there, and then all of a sudden spills a whole cup of aviation love on top of you. And I think a lot of that comes in for, especially pilots, is a culture. You love the culture, you love the camaraderie, and you love the travel. For me, I was literally driving down the 405 freeway one Saturday morning with my brother, and we saw this huge banner on the side of the road that said Discovery Flight, $49. So I'm like, heck, we got time. Let's go do it. So we stopped in. I did this $49 Discovery Flight, and that was it. I'm like, okay, I want aviation to be a part of my life. So through engineering, it ended up that was the byproduct of what I was doing. I'd engineer, and then I'd fly home, or I'd fly and then engineer. And I'm like, okay, I really love flying. I don't really like engineering. I don't like being in an office. I need to change this up. So after 10 years of engineering and the economy tanking in 2007, I'm like, that's it. The people that I was working for at the time, they were board members at Utah Valley University in Provo, Utah. And that's how I ended up at Utah Valley University. So they paid basically my way through that school to go and get my aviation certificate. So,
which I highly recommend. If you're going to get away for somebody to pay for that, that certificate do that?
Yes, because it's extremely expensive. I think now it's in upwards of 150,000 plus. So
yes. Well, that leads me into talking about aviation then, because one of the big things that we're seeing right now is a shortage of pilots. Huge. It is. It's detrimental. So a few years ago, 10-ish years ago, at least within the last 10 years, the FAA changed the rules around that the retirement age moved from 60 to 65, right?
That's right. So that was one of the things that sparked the, I guess, the change, I guess, for pilots is that change in retirement age, as well as there was a kind of a benchmark crash that changed aviation history forever. And that was the, I always blank on this one, but I know it was a Q400 back east. I don't want to really mention the carrier, but we'd found in the discovery that one pilot was extremely under, what do you call it? I'm thinking of the word, when he didn't have enough rest. She didn't have enough rest. She had commuted in, and we'd realized that through her inexperience of commuting, as well as the captain's inexperience or lack of experience or lack of proficiency, this crash happened. So the FAA came in with FAR Part 117, which drastically changed aviation and moved the pilot requirement from 250 hours in the commercial seat to 1,500 hours. And that caused where we're at today. I mean, honestly, I guess I should say that was the catalyst of the cause for where we are today. That being said, I do think that the rule was good.
Yes.
Because now I don't sit in the right seat with people that are brand new to aviation. They may be brand new to my airplane, but not in aviation. So they at least have experience enough to know what kind of the overall flow is. So.
Yes, I want to explain a little difference here. So you work for United Express, which is specifically regional.
That's right.
So there are a few ways that airlines work. So you'll see a United Express on the tail, right? And so typically you look down at your ticket and it'll say operated by, and that'll be a different airline.
Correct.
It won't be mainline United. So that being said, there was a school of thought that regional carriers and regional airlines are less than, which is definitely not true. They are paid less.
That's right.
But that being said, there's no less experience. Sometimes take that with a grain of salt.
At the beginning, yes. At the beginning, there is a little bit of an experience gap. So you get those pilots that are brand new, 1,500 hours. Now, the I guess less experience is not. The gap isn't as big anymore between what you're seeing at the majors, is what we call them, the mainline carriers versus the regionals. You know, it used to be 250 hours versus maybe they were hiring at 5,000 hours at the majors. So that would be your most inexperienced pilot. That being said, when you look at, like you said, it's not lesser than. Right. I have to laugh because every time I come into Denver and something weird is going on, whether it's wind, weather, wind shear, whatever it is, and somebody says, well, hey, how come that aircraft gets to land and we don't? And I had one time where I was coming in, we had a 45-knot crosswind. Our carrier doesn't carry a specific crosswind limitation. We came in and landed while all the other aircrafts are going around. And the tower made the most poignant comment on the planet. He said, hey, and this is referencing me, how many landings do you have this month? And I said 76. And he asked the aircraft that was on the go-around, how many landings do you have this month? And he said 3. So that's the big difference between regionals and majors as far as the pilots. We are in the cockpit almost 4 days a week. We're doing multiple landings a day. We're flying the aircraft right to the edge of its operating envelope every single time we fly it, especially the route structure that I've done for the last almost 7 years of my life, which is Aspen and Eagle, or Vail, Colorado. And we've seen this. We've done this, 4 times probably this day. And so the experience really isn't an equation anymore in the airlines. It's all about time in that seat.
Yes.
So.
Absolutely. And the reason for bringing up this difference between the regional and the mainline carriers, and adding to the conversation about the pilot shortage here.
Right.
So typically what has happened is students would start out and they would get their 1,500 while they're getting their licensing and things like that. And then they would typically go into a regional carrier, get prepped, and then they would follow their career
Correct.
into a mainline. That's no longer happening because all of the sudden so the FAA moved the age of retirement up to 65. Now we're seeing those retire. those guys retiring, right?
Yeah.
All of those pilots are moving out. So now you have people coming straight from school with those 1,500 hours into a mainline position. We're skipping the regional airlines altogether, which actually have a majority of the short-term flying around the country. And so it's a big deal.
It's a huge deal. And all they did was push back the inevitable, right? We saw the baby boomers era kind of come, and now they're all retiring, and aviation wasn't really pushed. It's not a job that, one, everybody can afford, right? So every time I try to get somebody into aviation, I'm like, hey, you should go fly. It's a great job. Well, how do I get $150,000 from the government to go fly? Or how do I get these student loans? And the few that can are 1/100% of the people that can get those loans because their parents financially are set up financially so that they can give them some sort of co-signing or whatever it might be. And to be honest, all they did was delay this huge pilot shortage we have coming in over the next 10 years. I think Americans said they have 1,500 pilots of their, I think they're around 10,000 pilots. So you do the math, 1,500 pilots are out the door this year. 1 year, that's it. So we don't have that many coming in. We have maybe, Metro State, maybe 10 a semester coming through. Wow. Maybe.
Wow.
If they finish. So that's coming in the door.
Yeah.
So maybe 7 or 6 finish. Embry-Riddle, maybe 20 a class. So it's concerning.
And those are schools with wonderful aviation programs.
Incredible.
That's what they're known for.
That's right.
Yeah. So hopefully we can get something fixed here. I would like to see.
I think a lot of it comes down to that pay gap, and we've started to close that. So the pay gap is huge, right? So when I actually started in aviation, I went to Great Lakes Airlines here in Denver, which is now no longer in business because of the pay problem. I started at that company so mind you, I had $175,000 in loans at the time, and I started at Great Lakes Aviation at $12.50 an hour. $12.50 an hour. I could have literally gone
and that's $12.50 an hour.
That's right. $12.50 an hour.
Yeah.
And that's only flight hours. So I would show up to the airport, do all my pre-flight stuff, and the only time that I get paid for was the time that we were in the air.
When the doors closed.
They paid gear up. So, so you got 20, 30 minutes. Yeah, which is way worse. And that's what I'm talking about. So that gap has now closed to where, even as a regional captain, I'm still making $100 an hour plus. And that is huge. And so when people look at the short term, they're like, okay, I don't have to take it. I don't have to take that pay gap for very long. Maybe it's 4 years, 5 years. And then they move on to, the majors where they get paid really well. So that's the huge thing. If those wages continue to increase, people will continue to come up the bottom. The problem is when they look at that and they go, oh, well, for 6 years of school, I can go 8 years of school, I can be a doctor and make millions a year, or I can go fly and make nothing.
Right.
So
exactly. Well, so I assume here you're advocating that these multi-billion-dollar companies might want to pay more to their entry-level employees.
And they are. And trust me, I am very thankful. And they've done really well with offering the bonuses and stuff like that. But yes, if we don't, I think the major thing to look at this is kind of like Delta, right? They have started compensating their pilots so well that people desire Delta from the time that they fall out of the womb. They're like, oh my gosh, my dad's a Delta pilot and we live in $1 million home. This is where I'm going. So they have their own kind of marketing from their families on. And then as well as people really looking at, if I'm going to put my life on the line and carry 300 passengers with me, how much financially is that worth? We just saw a trucker here in I-70 crash and kill 4 people, and he's just one truck. So, but now he's gone. His whole life is going to be gone. And as a pilot, that's what you look is my certificate liability in the rest of my life versus how much I'm getting compensated for that. It's the same as a doctor. And for 40 years, there's been nothing there. So now it's like, okay, cool. It's equal. So
it's comparable. Finally.
Yes, comparable. Yes.
Yes, we are getting there. So we want to talk about your transition into CNN and how you got involved with the Dr. Drew Show and talking about that.
So interestingly enough, it came by a really weird means. When I first transitioned from male to female in 2014, the term in aviation was gender identity disorder. And anybody that's in aviation knows that a disorder is a grounding prognosis. You're done. So if you get a disorder, you have to go get psychological help and all the rest of this stuff. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, or mental, I guess, yeah, it is mental disorders, had it termed as disorder. So throughout the 10-year study period that they did with Stanford and all the other medical agencies out there, they had learned that it really wasn't a disorder because it wasn't life limiting. A disorder means that it limits your life, and in some cases it can. In most cases, it's not. It's just something that is like a medical diagnosis. You cut your arm, you need to put a Band-Aid on it. We need to get it healed up a little bit. We may have to do some special treatment, and then once it's gone, it's gone. There's no big deal. So the FAA was kind of lagging in behind that. And I basically, when I went to transition, it was like, okay, I'm done. My career's gone because I'm gonna lose my license for 2 years. The employer that I was working with at the time wasn't really progressive in those areas. So I literally was like, I'm going to lose my job. And so I decided to grab Congresswoman Diana DeGette here in Denver. And we went kind of whole hog on the FAA. She teamed up with Congresswoman Jackie Spear, with Congressman Mike Honda out in California. And we all together basically rewrote the Aviation Medical Examiner's Guide to be from item 41, which is gender identity disorder, to gender identity dysphoria, which is now item 48. It's a complete rewrite of the Aviation Medical Examiner's Guide and where we've come, or where we were. So we rewrote it so that pilots that were mentally sound and transgender could fly aircraft and without being grounded for a significant period of time. That being said, through those channels, I was flying from Los Angeles to Aspen, and I had a producer for the Dr. Drew show actually, he was a CNN producer, and he said, hey, have you ever considered, you're funny, have you ever considered radio or television? I said, no, not really. He said, let me hook you up with somebody. And he hooked me up with one of the producers of the show, Bill Hinkle, and Bill and I hit it off. And the ability to travel didn't really hurt either. I could be there in 2-hour notice. And so I did one episode with Dr. Drew, which was my first time ever on live television, ever, even on a camera. And
I want to take a moment and stop here and I ask you about that. How was that experience for you?
I was terrified. Yeah. I mean, they gave me a card, the little note card, and they said, hey, memorize this, because this is on segment 2. You're going to say this on the camera. You can't have the card up, so you got to memorize this. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, and I remember the story. It was one of the fraternities, or I can't remember actually what it was. It was like a sorority was telling trans people they couldn't be a part of the sorority or fraternity. And so I remember sitting there and I'm looking at this card. Being in aviation, the one thing we do well is rote memorization, right? We can rote anything. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, cool, I got it down. And segment 2 comes and that camera turns and I'm like, oh my God. And it just kind of rattled all off. It was just kind of like, here it is. This is the story. And I could see it over here on this white screen. And I had this sense like that was my audition. And if I did really poorly at that, segments 3 and 4, I was gone. Like they were going to take me off. And it ended up turning out. And honestly, it was incredible. That whole, 3-year, 4-year time stretch that we were doing that show, it was amazing. I mean, it was, I felt like we were changing the world. We had people that, the Dr. Drew segment, as we called it, was the segment of the population that watched Dr. Drew was kind of the South. That was their heavy hitting area, just like I think CNN is as well. They're big. I think a lot of their audience is in the South, which is kind of weird.
Really? That's not what I would imagine either, especially CNN. I would imagine more Fox, but I digress.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just taking the word of the producers. So they were like, yeah. Our audience is down here. And you could tell some of the people that would comment on that show. I mean, to this day, you can go to my YouTube and look up one of the segments that I did on YouTube and look at all the comments on there. And you could tell there's a very antiquated way of approaching transgender issues. These things are already settled. We're not arguing anymore whether or not transgender people are valid to walk in public, or whether or not it's a medical disposition, something that can be healed, something that is not life-limiting, and the word disorder is completely in the trash now. That's 5 years gone. That's all stuff that's in history. We're now talking about how best to augment our population to accept trans people as real people and viable people and people that actually count in our communities. that's the thing we're working on now. It's kind of like and I hate to, it's nowhere near this catastrophic, but the African American community that is still struggling to find viability in our communities today. It's the exact same thing they went through. They were slaves. Now they're not slaves. Now, how do we best, how do we equal out our communities? How do we stop this bigotry and this fascism and hatred and start integrating these communities? And that's where we're at today. And if you look at the Dr. Drew show, I felt like we could have closed that gap a little bit more. And so it was an awesome experience. And Dr. Drew is the absolute biggest sweetheart. And I'm sure he would absolutely fly up here to be on a show if you ever wanted him. So, yeah.
Is he as handsome in real life as he is?
Way worse. Way worse. Like, he's the type that, like, when you see him, you're like, oh, man, okay. I could do a 25th story flat, with a nice car with that guy. But his wife is equally as amazing. So,
awesome.
Anyways.
Well, you've just crushed my dreams about marrying him.
I know. Well, Anderson Cooper might still be. Oh, wait. Never mind.
We can try.
I know. It's true.
But that being said, I have to tell you, I shared that passion with you as well. I talk about a plethora of things in this room, anything from music to creative industries to public policy, right? I run the gamut of things that I talk about in here, and I like to think that sometimes I get somebody on that, like, we're making a difference here.
Right.
We're getting out a word to an audience that maybe hasn't looked at this before. So I share your passion with you.
Yeah,
quite obviously, yours was more focused on the LGBTQ, specifically the trans community, right?
Yeah.
So I have to ask you, what about this? Caitlyn Jenner is a big name. One of the things.
She's also a really good friend of mine.
Good.
Yes.
Well, interestingly enough, I think she actually was a great catalyst for this movement, and someone who was so unexpected to make a transition that I think people really stopped and listened to what she had to say about it. But that being said, she has quite a conservative viewpoint.
I think she did up until recently.
Okay.
I think, and this is me hypothetically speaking on behalf of her.
Absolutely. We would never put words in her mouth.
Right.
Yeah.
Getting to know her, fairly well over the last couple of years, she definitely had that conservative viewpoint. And I think a lot of her conservatism comes in the fact that something we talked about before we started the show, which is the tax reform. When you're worth a certain amount of money, you want to hang on to that money. And you believe that in society, we all believe that maybe Republicans protect personal wealth more than Democrats do. And I think that's a common misconception based off of, just, I think, political bias and news and, all the stuff you watch every day. That being said, I think that's why she was conservative. When she started seeing the attacks in the transgender community, it stopped almost instantaneously. And she came out as a vigorous advocate against, the current political climate and especially Pence. I don't think so much. And Donald Trump over the past has had a great relationship with Caitlyn Jenner. In fact, even, in New York City, we saw the interview where he was like, she can go to the bathroom anywhere she wants. And now we're starting to see kind of his base turn against the trans community, which is, like I said before, this is already something that's settled. And I think she sees this as now, I was wrong. And she'll actually tell you that. I was wrong. I absolutely was wrong. I supported the wrong political party, and we are where we are. So. Yeah.
Well, and I think one thing that we should mostly focus on as we move forward and progress here in the U.S., and this is my opinion, is coming to the middle of the road.
That's right.
Sit, listen to somebody that has a counter argument to you, right? But listen.
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing is stop judging me off the way I look. Because I didn't go to your house and tell you how to live your life. And I think that's the funny thing is that's a Republican thing that they would say, hey, don't come into my house and tell me how to live. But then you go and make fun of me in public and you laugh at me and you say, welcome to downtown Denver or San Francisco, whatever it is. We have to start listening and reach a middle ground in this.
Absolutely. We have to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about some current legislation that is happening, hopefully some good news out of that. We'll see. Yeah. But we'll be right back with Jessica Taylor. Stay with us here on Connect and Collaborate. Be sure to like and subscribe our YouTube page while you're here. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Connect and Collaborate. Once again, I am Alex Hopkins, your on-air producer, and we have in studio with us Jessica Taylor. She is a captain at United Express, regional carrier for Mainline United, as well as a frequent media contributor, most especially on CNN's Dr. Drew show. And we've been talking about a lot of things. So I'm double dipping here with you, so to speak. So we're talking about LGBTQ rights in the workplace. We're also talking about some aviation news that's going on. But we took off in the last segment, and I want to talk about some more legislative things that are happening in the LGBTQ world. So we know right now that the Supreme Court has 3 cases that will determine whether a federal civil rights law regarding workplace discrimination applies to the LGBTQ community. So this is Title VII, and right now Title VII prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. But it doesn't include anything about sexual orientation or gender identity. So we have 3 cases, 2 of which are about sexual orientation and 1 about gender identity. Thoughts on this? Where's your head at?
It's a deep hole. I have a great attorney. She, I haven't had to use her in a long time. Her name's Lisa Bloom. She's a national famous attorney, world famous attorney. She's the new Gloria Allred. And one thing she would always tell me when I would call her up is, "You are protected under the Title VII." I said, "What do you mean? It says sex. You are a woman. Stop viewing yourself as these other titles. When we go to court, you are a woman that's getting discriminated in the workplace. And if a trans man comes to me and says the same thing, it's the exact same situation, right?" So she was great at defining those protections towards the trans community in appropriate ways. One of the things that, and I'm gonna just kind of reach in here, the LGBTQ thing. It's hard to be the same when you have a different title. And when you walk into a room, and I'm going to take this back to aviation, and you're an airline captain, and you sit down at the table, it all of a sudden becomes a dominating force, right? People just want to hear about travel, and they want to hear about the airplane, and then they want to hear about things falling apart, and they want to tell you an experience. When you're a trans person, they automatically delete you from the equation. It's something that when we see somebody different, I just watched Bohemian Rhapsody, and one thing he said, I went back and watched some of his documentaries, and one thing he always would say is to Jim Hutton, his boyfriend, "Darling, if you want to get made fun of in public, just go out and be yourself for the day." And that's something that trans people hear and see every single day. Just go out and be yourself for a day, and you'll get made fun of, and you'll get kicked out of places, and you get fired from your job just because of something you're authentically made to be. People have said, well, it's not authentic. Well, of course it is. In any case, it's authentic because either first of all, what trans person would choose to be trans and what gay person would choose to be gay? They don't. Even if you view it as a sin, it's something that is given from birth, right? If you don't view it as a sin, it's something that we're born as, and that's how I believe it, is something we have been born to be.
It is not a choice.
It's not a choice. And so when we talk about workplace protections, imagine if somebody walked into this office right now and was like, "You know what, Alex, you're a female, hit the street." And that's how it's working for trans people. And then what they say when you sit down and have a conversation with them is, well, my religious protections or my religious beliefs are what I'm being a boss on. And because you're trans, I can't employ you. Okay, cool. When these tables turn and all of a sudden it's a Muslim job owner or a Muslim owner, and they're saying, because you're a Christian, you can't work for my company. We got to stop this. So this is the point. This is the breaking point. And whether or not this goes one way or another, it's a breaking point. So, and I think a bigger breaking point than what most people in the communities think about, because we have a lot of gay men, a lot of lesbian women, a lot of trans people. In fact, one of the largest employers in Las Vegas is a trans woman. And they're going to go, "No, I'm not employing Christians anymore. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry." And you take this to the Supreme Court, and we'll go back and go to this religion thing. And if I can be fired for being trans, then we're going to go back to the Supreme Court on the religion thing. Yeah, it's protected, but maybe it won't be. Maybe I'll get a new president, a Democratic president, Bernie Sanders, and he says, you know what, you're right. We're removing religion from the protections. So how far do you want to take this? Do you want to continue down this road, or do we just want to stop and say, you know what, you're equal in our communities. We don't care whether you're trans, LGBTQ plus, doesn't matter. If you're doing your job well, and I think that's one thing that I've been fairly successful with, is I had to take, as the first person that's openly LGBTQ at my company, I had to take approximately 5,000 pilots and a company of 14,000 employees and go, hey, I'm not what you think I am. I'm a very highly qualified person in my career field. And just because I'm trans doesn't disqualify me from doing a good job and being an amazing person and captain in this industry. And I think that 5-year stretch has proven that. So.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that you're referring to here is the Religious Freedom Restoration Act,
Right.
which prohibits state agencies from impinging a person's religious freedom. It could outweigh these accusations of workplace discrimination as far as LGBTQ is concerned. So that being said, for example, one of the things that happened was a cake.
Oh,
right?
That's right. You're right. Here in Colorado.
Right here in Colorado, we had a baker, cake shop owner. He didn't want to bake a cake for it was a gay wedding.
Right.
And because of this Religious Freedom Restoration Act, he didn't have to.
Right.
And so I one of these things that we're going to frequently see is this fighting over religion versus, sexual orientation or gender identity discrimination.
Right.
But as we said in the last segment, I think coming to the middle, listening to your opposing person, and making some strides to meet in the middle, maybe we can really find a path here. But staying stagnant on both sides does nothing for anyone.
And I think that's where we're at, especially when it comes to the Supreme Court. It'll be interesting to see what happens with all of these things. And it still stinks. It stings more than stinks that I could walk into a place and be denied. And I have. I documented very well. About a year ago, I purchased a boat down in down in Dallas, Texas. And I was turned away by 3 different people who would not give me their business to haul the boat out and put it on a trailer because I was transgender. The one guy walked out just laughing his butt off because he knew the second that he saw me, he was going to make fun of me, and I've seen it. And to me, being somebody that was raised in religion, the Christian religion, it hurts my heart. I've never had a Christian person walk up to me and say what I think God would say to me, which is, I love you. And I'm here for you, and if you ever need me, call me, or can I take you to church? Because they know that I would be thrown out of their church. I would be asked not to come back, or whatever it might be. And that's what sucks, is that divide is not only in our communities now, it's going back to our government, which we thought we'd kind of reestablish that the separation of church and state was a real thing. It's not just a hypothetical thing we use as a jargon in political conversations.
Yeah. So. And that's a basis for a lot of arguments outside of the LGBTQ. But you, interestingly enough, said nobody chooses to be trans. Nobody chooses to be gay. And while I definitely agree with you, I totally believe we're born with it. Why would somebody choose a life where you're inherently made fun of by the public?
It's not just made fun of. It's killed. Yeah. It's murdered. It's beat up. It's fired from jobs. It's an entire life that, if you're in the right community, it can be extremely rewarding. If you're in the wrong community, which right now we're seeing that, which I think a lot of us kind of thought, like after 2016, the fight was already gone. We've stepped over this whole battleground of whether or not our legitimacy in our communities was real. And I think that we thought that when they passed the marriage equality, when Barack Obama basically passed a marriage equality for LGBTQ people. And I think a lot of us walked away with, okay, cool, we can lay our backpacks down. But then we saw the uprising of the alt-right, which is what we're seeing right now, and we're seeing that religious oppression come back on our communities, and they're now back oppressing the LGBTQ communities, which is funny because they say they're being oppressed, and it's something I think that we're just going back and forth on, and who knows what's going to happen in the next legislature. And I think they're trying to gain ground on that stuff, but it's not a life that we choose. In fact, if you ever, I would challenge anybody that's never had a conversation with an LGBTQ person, a true LGBTQ person that's lived a life, what their life has been like, first of all. And then second of all, just get to know them as a person. And I always say that every time I'm made fun of, it's usually by somebody that's carrying the insecurity of some sort of homosexual, lesbian, transsexual, whatever it might be. They're carrying that, because when I have that conversation, I sit down and I go, oh my gosh, like this person is harboring some hostility towards his or their own sexual identity. And all they're trying to do is compensate for that. They're compensating for something that they're hiding. And I'll be honest, when I transitioned, it was interesting to see the difference in my own life, in that I felt like I had to hide, and I felt like nobody could ever see my real inside. And now I transition, it's like, oh my gosh, it's like in fact, if you go back to the Bible, Paul always references this reference of taking off a backpack, right? It was like taking off this backpack of burdens and going, here, this is me. And then all of a sudden the rocks started, and I started getting persecuted for being authentic. Honestly, that's the hardest part of this life, is watching how people treat you. So.
Well, I commend you for sticking through that and being in the public eye and going through this. But I want to talk about, you specifically mentioned making sure that you get involved in the right community, that if you are an LGBT individual, making sure that you surround yourself with the right people. That can be really tough, particularly for younger people. But I want to specifically talk about employers and making sure that we have a nice, diverse workforce.
Yeah.
Right? This is something that will continually grow, right?
Yes.
As we see more people coming to the playing field. We have a lot more women applying for leadership roles, for example, right? That's diversifying. One example of that. And so as we look at that, we want to make sure that everyone's got an equal opportunity to be hired. Any suggestions for employers as far as do's and don'ts, maybe around verbiage or around perhaps having a meeting about, let's make sure that we aren't saying these wrong things, or that we have a welcoming space for everyone?
I mean, one thing you said, which is make sure these people get hired, that's the start, right? So how we start diversifying our employee group is to hire people that truly match our profile. And it doesn't matter if that person's a man, a woman, their race, ethnicity, it doesn't matter. Does that person fit the bill for our company profile? And something that I love about United is they have these things called BRGs, business resource groups. Those business resource groups are for their military, for their cancer survivors, for their LGBTQ members, for all of these different groups. And these groups come together and they meet to make United a whole workplace for everybody. And one thing that I've been seeing recently in these companies that have me come and visit and talk about my experience as a trans person in the corporate world, and not only am I an airline pilot, but I do real estate stuff as well, and then I do all of the media stuff on the side, and then I work alongside the FAA to help change legislation still currently for LGBTQ people.
So you don't sleep?
No.
Okay.
Like honestly, it's and yeah, it's horrible. One thing I've seen that's really cool is they've seen now this political gap start causing or start rifting in their companies, and they're like, okay, now we need to make a political BRG just to help bring the two sides of the equation. And not only that, as being somebody that's on, I would say, more towards the left, definitely on the left, having come from the right, the hardest conversations I have in my workplace is political conversations. And it's not just that we're having the conversation, it's how do we bring these work groups together that have different political views and make them profitable for our company. And I think the airlines have perfected this. You may not agree with that person that you're sitting with for 4 hours, but at least you guys can have a conversation. It's a professional conversation about your political differences. And sometimes you accomplish great things. And I've seen those great things in that these people go back to their communities and share these differences. And then they also feel welcomed at United and at other companies, Apple, Google, all these places, to feel like their opinion matters, that they matter, that Steve Jobs says it all the time. Why do we hire smart people and tell them what to do? And these are smart people. We need to keep bringing them together. And these BRGs help bring those together. And not only that benefits your bottom dollar, because these people are more productive because they feel welcomed and involved in your company.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. I love hearing that. And I think one of the business resource groups, I love that. I don't think I knew that about United, but that's something you can implement in any industry, and It sounds amazing.
And it doesn't have to be a big thing. It just has to be a small group of people filled with individuals that are different to help build your company and make it something that people, when they look at from the outside, they go, oh my gosh, well, maybe I'm a potato farmer, and they have a potato farmer business resource group, and those people help advocate for me. That's pretty cool. And they give scholarships to kids that want to be potato farmers. It's the same thing. It's just bringing everybody together and helping your company, especially big companies, be more attractive to younger and even older potential advocates or potential employees for your company.
Oh,
so.
Absolutely. Well, and it's, fact of the matter is, once you have diversity on your team, you're opening up your doors to so many other avenues, to so many other customers, right? Yeah. Yep. If I see that you've got a woman on your board,
100%.
I might be way more interested in applying for a job there because she gets it. She understands. She's a woman. We have that simpatico.
Yeah. I just watched the CEO of Stitch Fix talk on CNN, and I was just blown away by her candor in women in the workspace and how hard it's been for her. And when she said she found that group of women that actually, drove her to her point of success, I was like, oh my gosh, like I can't imagine working for her and just not wanting the same thing she has. Like that, it's incredible. So.
Yes, absolutely. We'll take over the world one day, Jessica.
No, I'm kidding.
I do want to turn tables again and kind of bring it full circle, if you will, and talking a little bit more legislation in the aviation world. So we got to talk on this 737 MAX Boeing, because that was detrimental. Lives were lost.
Yeah.
This was a big deal.
It is a big deal.
Yeah.
It's still a big deal.
Still a big deal. Yes.
I think that my personal opinion is that Boeing's going to have a hard time recovering from this one. And I say that because they didn't come out and ground the aircraft themselves. They had to wait till government stepped in and did something. And the aircraft has some sort of, and nobody really knows what it is. Everybody's speculating what the actual thing is that's causing these airplanes to crash, in the sense that why did this one crash and why did this one have the problem, but this one didn't crash? And where is the problem? And we're seeing that right now, right? It's been grounded for well over 60 days. And if there was a simple fix to this problem, it would have just been pull out, replace, and put something new. And we saw this with the Cirrus Vision aircraft, which is a GA aircraft. They grounded it for the angle of attack limiter. They found the part, which was a software issue. They plugged in a new one, and we're back flying again. This is not a simple issue. This is a hardcore issue, and it's going to be very difficult to get passengers back into this aircraft. In fact, we just saw Southwest Airlines, the largest Boeing aircraft operator on the planet, start looking at the Airbus 220 as a replacement to Boeing. That's a huge hit. And I don't think we took it serious enough at first, and I think Boeing didn't either. They just thought it was a pilot proficiency thing. No, it may actually be something that deletes this company.
Wow.
I think that they're going to have to find something to rebrand or do something, because imagine a passenger getting on that aircraft now.
Yeah.
Like, just a normal Joe, somebody that knows nothing about the industry.
Well, and I can tell you from experience, as you know, I was a flight attendant in another life. And one of the things that any time there was an airline crash or really any drama in the airline industry that made national or local news even, inevitably somebody gets on the plane that knows nothing about the aviation industry and has to make a comment about it.
Yeah, rightfully so. Right. I always tell those passengers, I'm like, you have, this is your life. And I always tell them when they come up in the cockpit, this is why I like to have that open door cockpit, this is their life. And I have spent 10 plus years, 12 plus years getting to this point where, and that's something about the smaller carrier that I work for that I love. When you walk on that airplane, you might as well be my family member. I want you to come up and feel the pulse of the pilots and make sure that we haven't been drinking or doing something stupid. That is your responsibility as a responsible traveler to come up and just say hello. And I welcome that. And if there's been a problem, I say this on CNN a lot. It stops the heartbeat of every person in the industry for a second when there's been a fatality or an issue like what we saw at Southwest with the aircraft engine blowing up. We're like, oh man, could that happen to us? Is this what's going on here? And do we need to do we need to stop flying for a minute? And that's something we don't deal with a lot in the aviation community, is the psychological impact, not only to our passengers, but to our flyers as well. Yeah.
I definitely think it's one of those things, though. This, as you said, they may have to rebrand, which caught me off guard a little bit. Boeing's huge. Has been a titan in the industry for many, many years.
Yeah.
Well, that being said,
to think about that, Boeing has, but also go back in history. Northwest was a titan in the industry. Northwest Airlines, they're not here anymore. What was the American one? Was TSA or whatever? Yeah, TSA. TWA.
Yeah.
Another one. Titan's gone. Okay. Mm-hmm. And that's what happens when you have big problems.
Yeah.
Maybe they need to be rebranded. And I think an entire change of the way that we implement technology in the cockpits. These things aren't problems until they start making them problems. And when we have certification standards for one aircraft and not the other one, and people forgot about the 787. Remember what the nickname for 787 was Old Sparky, because they were lighting on fire at the gate? What are we doing? Airbus hasn't had these problems. So what's going on? Is there a certification standard in Europe that we're not adhering to in the United States? What's going on? We need to collaborate on these issues. And in aviation, it's so, don't look over the fence type of thing. So anyways.
One of the other things that you said, too, that caught me off guard was how long it took them to report. They waited for government to intervene before they did anything, which is shocking, quite honestly.
For pilots, it's more than shocking. It could have killed somebody here in the United States. And not that it's less overseas, but this company is a United States company. It's American made. And we sent these aircraft overseas, maybe with the not the right training, whatever it is. And we didn't step in and say, we're done. Just ground the fleet for 24 hours. Let's figure out what's going on, or 48 hours, let's figure out what's going on. No, we had to wait for the president to come in and go, nope, you're done. And that to me, like you said, I mean, it probably saved some lives.
Absolutely. I would wholeheartedly agree with you that that if we hadn't stopped it in its tracks, there would be no need for another plane crash just to prove that something is wrong.
Yeah.
So they are looking into that. It is still pretty devastating. So we'll see where Boeing ends up on that.
You never know.
Exactly. So Jessica, in the last few minutes here, I would like you to give some advice, speaking from somebody who's made their own personal brand. What are some good tips, if you will, that I can steal from you to ensure that I'm fostering great relationships?
I mean, just speaking on the LGBTQ front, all you have to do is be nice and accepting. You don't have to like what they do or who they are. Oftentimes we find people we don't like who they are or what they do, but we love them as a human, right? And as far as just kind of integrating those two lives, mine came by accident. I didn't see being the first trans pilot to transition and keep my medical certificate as being something special. But what I did realize is that it was something special to a lot of people, and it helped give hope to a community that was marginalized, largely marginalized. And I think just in business, when you find something that you're good at, passionate about, take those things and run with them. Eventually, every person that I've seen, and I mentioned Freddie Mercury and Queen before, he was good at it and he kept at it, and he kept doing what he knew he was good at, and he finally was successful. Anybody in public, Caitlyn Jenner, you find something you're passionate about and you do it time and time again. And one thing we like to say in aviation is we like to perfect what we do every single time we get in the cockpit. And you are good at one task, but then you take it to the next and the next and the next, and you start perfecting those tasks. And the other thing is you can't be afraid to get out. I watch this with YouTubers all the time. And one thing I'm terrified is going and making my own YouTube channel, because I'm terrified of being known as a vlogger in public with a camera and all that stuff. I feel like it's embarrassing. But when you're passionate about it and you have a message you want to share, or a product or whatever it is, you just keep at it. And then expanding into those different avenues, the people that are doing the same thing you are, and collaborating with them, whether or not it's paying them and figuring out why they're successful, or integrating them into your own thing. And when 1 million people connect with 250,000 people, or 1 million people connect with 250,000 people, and 50,000 people connect with 1 million, and so on and so forth, you all of a sudden start expanding that. And I think that's what Dr. Drew did for myself, was when that went from an audience of 10,000 to 30 million, it was like, oh, cow, like, this is crazy. People actually want to love on our community and integrate trans people into their community and corporations. So.
Well, thank you very much, one, for being such a verbose spokesperson for the LGBTQ community. It's a voice that's desperately needed, and so we appreciate your contribution to that.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yes, of course. And be sure to visit cobrt.com, check out our events page, sign up for our newsletter, check out the radio page as well while you're there. You can find this podcast and more at that radio page. Like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you have any comments, go ahead and leave those as well. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.